Okay, I'll introduce the interview by telling you my name is the interviewer and moderator, Larry Schlupp, S-C-H-L-U-P-P. I'm interviewing you on behalf of Highlands Ranch Historical Society. We're here in the Highlands Ranch Mansion and the date is August 26, 2015. The goal of this interview is to identify and capture your life experiences, including the ranch features and structures and your work, the work activities, the relationships you had with the Phipps family and others on the ranch, and the geographic areas of the ranch at the time that you worked here on the Phipps Highlands Ranch. So with that, I'm going to start the first question, and I'm going to ask that of you, Mike, and I'm going to ask this of each of you, and that is if you will give us a short background, who you are, when and where you were born, when you came to Highlands Ranch, what your activities and interests were, and how long you worked here.
Well, as you said, my name's Michael O'Malley. I was born in Chillicothe, Ohio. My parents moved to Littleton in 1960. Went to Arapahoe High School. Right out of high school, came to the ranch. Worked the ranch. It's been a long time to recall the amount of time. For a short time, the first stint, left and went to Texas for a year and then came back to the ranch and worked an additional couple of years. Currently I'm in small business for myself out in Watkins, Colorado.
Good. Skeet?
Well, I was born in Pueblo and lived out east Pueblo on Orange Springs, southeast Pueblo on, I forgot the ranch name down there, along the Warpinol River. Then we moved up to Colorado Springs, worked there a while, and I worked everywhere else, worked with dairy cows, and then I come up here in the 60s, and about 60, 61, I was put in the bunkhouse. Bob Swafford used to be foreman. Bud Morgan used to be foreman. And then I met some of the other ranch hands here too.
Now when you say, did you say Bud Norman?
Bud Morgan.
Bud Morgan, thank you. Okay, Walter, what's your background?
Well, I have a similar background to my brother. Skeet's my brother, and I was born when we were living on the Butler Ranch down by Pueblo. He was trying to think of the Butler Ranch, and I lived down there about a year, and then we moved up to the Banning and Lewis ranches. Raymond Lewis owned the Banning and Lewis ranches. He was a very close friend of Lawrence Phipps. They used to play polo together at the Denver Polo Club, the Broadmoor Hotel, Cheyenne Mountain Country Club in Colorado Springs, and they used to go out and play with Will Rogers in Santa Barbara, California, and Will Rogers used to come here. They were very good close friends with Will Rogers, all of them were, and they were close friends. And after my brother came up here, after about 1961 or 2, my sister was also living here, and her husband. They were living in the apartment on the north or the south end of the bunkhouse, where Michael O'Malley eventually moved into. And they were working on the ranch here. I guess my brother-in-law, Jim Smith, he probably cowboyed some. And then my mom brought my brother up here. We came to visit, and my brother asked somebody, probably Mr. Phipps or Bud Morgan or someone, about a job, and they hired him that day. And then my sister and brother-in-law left for Kentucky to work on a ranch that raised racehorses, thoroughbred racehorses, out by the Kentucky Derby. And they were out there about a year, and then they came back and worked and lived down at a hunt club where they had the Arapaho hunts. Down in the Wildcat area, they call it now, I think. But it was the polo grounds and the hunt grounds south of the mansion, over the hill from the mansion. And they took care of the dogs and what horses were down there. Whoever kept their horses down there, they worked for George Beeman, the father of Marvin Beeman, who became a veterinarian. He was encouraged to go to college by Mr. Phipps. And then after my brother worked here a while, Bud Morgan or someone, while I was visiting here, asked me if I wanted to come up and help them brand, and I could stay in the bunkhouse. I had been staying with my sister a time or two when they worked over by Cherry Creek Reservoir on the Equitation Center, where they had horses and had hunter jumper horses over there. And they took care of that place, and I'd stay with them a while. And so I came up and started spending 2 weeks every year helping during branding time, the last 2 weeks in May after school got out. My first year up here was probably 1964 or 63 or 64. I was just getting ready to go into junior high school in the 7th grade. And so actually this was my very first experience at actually working on a ranch, because down home we were artificially inseminating the cattle. It was a registered Hereford operation, and my dad would go out and check the cattle in the truck, and then he'd let me sleep in till 8 or so o'clock, and then I'd get up and watch TV and watch the Beverly Hillbillies or Gilligan's Island or Andy Mayberry, and then he'd come, and if we had to go out on horseback, then I'd go out with him on the horseback. And when I came up to the Highlands Ranch, it was totally different. I remember the first day my brother was banging on the bunkhouse door where I was sleeping, and it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and we had to go over into the dining room and eat breakfast. They had a cook. I think the first cook here, well, they had 2 different cooks. One was Bill Reed and his wife, Della Reed. And then they had Martha and Roy lived in the cook's quarters there. And they had the cook's quarters on the south side of the kitchen and dining room. And so we got up and we had breakfast, and then had to get the horses ready to go gather cattle from whatever pasture we were branding at that time. Sometimes we would brand here around the headquarters, all the pastures around the headquarters here, the windmill pasture and the front pasture, the 16 pasture, and then there was some pastures over east here. And then they'd go to the Cheese Ranch, and then I think there was a couple other pastures on the other side of that we'd ride our horses over there. And I would ride along with the other cowboys. And my brother, he sprayed the cattle, and he had to go along with Don Cole, and they would haul the sprayer over to the corrals where they were spraying, and my brother would run the sprayer, and they'd run the cattle down the chute into the sprayer one at a time, and his spray would get all over the cattle. The chute water would come everywhere. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. He had to wear a mask and everything, and sometimes I'd get up on the sprayer and watch the cattle in there.
Now, Skeet, were you spraying for parasites?
bugs and air flies and that kind of stuff for it. Calves, cows, the whole works.
Oh, yeah.
Had to mix the solution and put it in the vat, and it had a gasoline engine to put to suck it. Then I had a valve to hit, and had to use the two levers, one for the back side, one for the front side. You had to be doggone quick at it, otherwise, boom, they go through it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your individual work functions. We'll get back to branding in a minute, Walter, but Mike, what were your primary functions here on the ranch?
Well, depended on the day and the season, but we'd meet in the bunkhouse early morning. Single guys would be finishing up breakfast. I was married, and we would come in and have coffee with them. And then Bud Morgan, who was the foreman at that time, would dole out the duties for the day, depending on what needed to be done, whether it was fencing or spraying or haying or changing oil in vehicles or whatever needed to be done, mowing the lawn of the mansion or anything that needed to be done. He'd single us out and tell us, you know, you two go do this, you one go do that. It just depended on the day.
And how many people were here in the bunkhouse? And how many people are you talking about?
Well, it varied, but when I was here, I can remember Skeeter, Herbie, Greg. There was a Canadian kid that lived here for a short time. I think his name was Spencer. Robert McLean, Bill Ecord. As I recall, those were the guys in the bunkhouse. And then the rest of us were married, and we would come from different places on the ranch to the headquarters, as we called it, and file out from there every day to do our chores.
Well, you talked, and branding was part of it. You talked about that, Walter. How many brands were they, and how did they vary the brands?
It was called a quarter circle bell.
Quarter circle bell. Was that the only brand that was used?
I think so.
That's the only one I've ever
That's
seen.
the only thing I can remember is the quarter circle bell.
Okay. Tell me, Walter, how did you like branding?
Well, when I come up here, I found out it was a lot of work. Getting up early in the morning and eating, and then going out and gathering the cattle, and then come back and watching my brother setting up the sprayer. And then we had to sort the cattle, had to cut the calves off, and they'd cut out any sick ones or lame ones and work with them. And then my brother would start spraying the cattle, and we would start branding the calves. And it was there was several boys on the ranch. Bud Morgan's grandson, I can't remember his name, would come here and he would help. And there were several of us kids. Denny Reed, Bill and Della Reed's son, he would help push calves down the chute, so the guys could catch them and brand them in the chute. They used the chute here. Some ranches rope and drag them to the fire. Some of the old die-hard cowboy types, they like to still rope them and drag them to the fire, but like we did down home, they used the chute. So we'd push calves down the chute all day, and I had to wear knee pads to keep from getting kicked so much, because anytime you walked into the pen of the calves or behind them, they'd kick you. So I had to wear my basketball knee pads, shin guards, and things to keep my shins in one place, because they'd kick the devil out of you, you know. And we pushed calves all day, and it was just tiring work. But Mr. Phipps was a thoughtful type person. He drove a little Valiant station wagon. He was kind of conservative in his ways, and he was very astute businessman and all his adventures, and he drove a little Valiant station wagon. He'd bring out a big old wash tub of Coors beer and then a big wash tub of Coke. And so I used to drink about 12 bottles of Coke a day. And the boys, the men, they would drink a few cans of beer throughout the day, but not too much, you know. And Mr. Phipps wouldn't tolerate any over drinking, but they'd take a break, relax, and maybe have a beer or a set of beer next to the chute and sip on it once in a while. And it was pretty relaxed kind of a time. And everybody would visit while they were branding, and it wasn't all total break your neck work, but they'd visit while they were branding, and we'd joke and have a big time. It was a lot of fun too. And everybody had some stories to tell at the break time, but it took all day to brand the calves, and then we'd start spraying them as soon as my brother got done with the cattle. And it was a good experience for me, kind of like going to boot camp. You know, I learned how to work. Nobody was going to let me sit around and watch TV all morning while I gathered cattle. I remember Bud Morgan's grandson. He always liked to go out and look around at different things, and sometimes after we gathered the cattle, we'd go look at some of the different things, and the stagecoach stops and the different things on the ranch. And Bud Morgan would come over and catch us and bring us back to the crowds and put us to work. But it was a great time. I remember the dining room down at the bunkhouse, it would fill up with people, sometimes 40, 50 people. Guests would come. Paul Swafford, the ranch manager, he would be here, and he was usually dressed up like I am in a suit, because he didn't get out and work too much anymore. But Paul Swafford used to be a member of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association, and my brother said that him and Bud Morgan would team rope once in a while together, and they worked cattle together. I seen them out here working cattle together one day. I tried to help them on foot a little bit one day, and it kind of got more in their way than help, but I helped them anyway.
Clyde, you were saying, depending on what season it is, how did the work on the ranch change during the various seasons?
Oh, it changed from winter to summer, summer to winter. In the wintertime, you had to go out and break ice and feed cattle. Several different pastures had windmills. You had to go out and break ice on the tanks and then throw it out so the cows could drink. Sometimes if the daggum windmill was turning, wasn't pumping water, you had to go pull it out. Pull the sugar rod out, and if you couldn't, if the bottom valve wasn't working, you had to pull the whole daggum line out. You get yourself wet if it wasn't working right. That really took a lot of time to do it. Once you started pulling, we had to use a truck and a pulley, rope pulley in order to pull everything out. And once you start back in, you had to clamp it down in order to put the pipe back in and go on down. Sometimes you can pick up that checker valve at the bottom by screwing it in and pull it up too. Sometimes if you couldn't get it, like part would come apart where you couldn't get it in there, and then have to change the leathers and stuff like that on everything. I used to climb windmills all the time around here, putting a bar across the top, hook it up, and come down. And sometimes I had to go up and bring the rope down and hook up again.
Mike,
It was fun working here.
yeah, wintertime was, you were talking about feeding too, Skeet. Mike, what was the feed? Was it just hay?
No, we fed some cake too, depending. We would get a bulk load of cake cubes. It's called different things, but it's a protein pellet that feed the cattle. I'll try to give them a pound or two a day. There'd be crews that would do that, and others that would break ice. And we'd feed them hay a lot of times also. Everybody had their own job. You get stuck breaking ice, you did that day in and day out. Depending on the weather, sometimes we were fortunate enough to have these mild winters. You didn't have to worry about so much ice, but I remember breaking ice when it was 6, 8 inches thick, and you pull out a couple chunks like that gets pretty heavy. And as the cold weather persisted, you'd have a pile of ice around the tank, and the cattle couldn't get to it. You'd have to move the ice eventually. But that was pretty much the winter time. Took up the winter.
How many cattle were on the ranch, Walter?
As far as I remember, there was close to 2,000 on all the different ranches. It wasn't just the main ranch here. There was the Cherokee north of Kiowa, and the Quarter Circle Bell north of Elizabeth, and plus some other places. And it seemed like there was, it might have varied, but there was between 1,000 and 2,000 head of cattle all the time. Probably, and he had a small registered herd too, a seed stock for his commercial Herefords. So it seemed like it could be close to 2,000 head. It'd take us 2 weeks to brand everything.
And they were primarily Herefords?
Yes, yeah. They would either be dehorned but they didn't have horns. Not all of them, but the registered cattle did. But they were purebred Herefords, most of them.
What about horses, Mike? How many horses were around the ranch?
Well, almost all the cowboys had a couple assigned to them. Nobody had their own except Bud, the foreman. We had a couple that were assigned to you. You rode one a day. Sometimes you'd ride him all day, he'd rest a day, and then you'd ride another one. Generally had 2 apiece, depending on how many hands were here, 10, 12, people working, married and single guys. And some would get the horses sometimes from the polo club. They'd bring them up and want us to ride them for a while to get them broke. Horses kind of evolved. You'd have one for a while. If you got broke down, you'd get rid of him. They'd give you another one. Seniority, they bring in a herd of horses. The senior guys got to pick horses first, and if you were a newbie, you got to tail end.
What were the features, Walter, that you remembered about the ranch? How many barns? Where were the barns?
Well, I don't remember how many barns there were exactly. I haven't been down there for a while, but I remember coming in and there was Don Cole's house, and in the main grounds there was Don Cole's house and Bud Morgan's house. And then the bunkhouse, which was a very long, it had the bunkhouse and the washroom and the dining room and the cook's quarters, and then it had another apartment on the end, maybe 2, I'm not sure. And then on the east side, across the road there was a dirt road that went through there, and then there were a couple of dirt roads that went through there, and there was a horse barn and had a hayloft in it. And I remember we was always checking to see if there was any girls bringing their boyfriends up to the hayloft. and then they had the dairy barn where they milked the cows and probably did some calving barn. And they had a big old machinery shed down there. And That's all I can remember. There might have been some others. I haven't been down there for a while. I can't remember for sure.
How about you, Mike? What do you remember about kind of the features around the ranch?
Well, as he said, when you came in from the main entrance, to the left was, he called it a machine shed. It was originally a big dairy barn, way back before, I think before Phipps had it. It was a giant dairy barn, and they used it to store.
Kincaid used to own it.
Yeah.
They had over 400 cows in that barn.
And then next was the dairy barn that was used by Herbie, the chore man. And then there was the big horse barn that he talked about with a hay mound in it. And then there was Bud's horse barn at the far end. And then across the road from them was some garages and storage sheds. And then the bunkhouse and the quarters.
What about the pastures around, how many pastures were around the ranch, Steve?
1, 2, Phipps Ranch, north, can't think of it, the old Stagecoach Road Ranch, main ranch, the registered Hereford part, main ranch, and we had, on the west end, we had 2 different parts of that ranch. We used to fork off down there where you go by the schoolhouse. It sits down there on the other side of Santa Fe, where you used to go down through there to go to the Plum Creek farm of it. I've done most, when I wasn't branding and spraying, I'd be on the farm and bucking hay on the Plum Creek. First time I ever run a daggum side delivery rake and run a baler, first time. That was a different experience.
So you both bucked hay and baled?
Oh yeah. Run a swather down there on the Plum Creek for the first time.
How was the baled hay stored?
We had to pick it up, put it up on the hill from the field or up off the river. Then we put some in the truck and brought up here to the main ranch and put up in the loft where we could feed them, and put some up here in some of the daggum where the big shed is, where the cows used to be milked. That was hold several bales of hay. We was out there down, break the sides down, drive a truck in and throw them up in on the one side of the daggum part of it.
Mike, was there any other, were there forage crops? Did they have any forage crops, or was it just primarily hay?
It was alfalfa. We had some wheat ground, which was on the north side of county line, over there closer to what then was Daniels Park Road. It was right at the intersection of Daniels Park and county line on the north side of county line. I don't remember how many acres. It was probably a half section or something over there that we planted wheat in. And then, like he said, down on the Plum Creek, which is now Chatfield Reservoir, was the hayfield.
There was a lot of wheat fields in there.
Yeah, we had some.
We'd like to take a look over into that river from one of the piers there. Riverside acreage used to be there, bunch of houses, homes. And then you used to strip farm all that on the west side as well as up on the east side of part of the Plum Creek there. Used to be wheat fields. And part of the, I can't really, yeah, part of the ranch up here was a wheat field strip farm too.
Now, Walter, were you around in the 65 flood?
I was not here, but we came up to visit. We were also affected down east of Colorado Springs with the flood of 65 too. Washed out a lot of our fences. All the water gaps across the creeks had to be replaced. Some of the other fences had to be replaced. Some of the cattle got mixed up with as resort them, but up here it was on with the Platte River. It was along the farms. I guess it was a little more devastating. My brother would know more about that, but we came up to visit afterwards to see the damage, but it was a while afterwards, later in the summer. But,
Skeet, what do you remember about the 65 flood?
65, it washed out everything. Bud Morgan used to live down on the Plum Creek, and Fred Hunter used to live on the Plum Creek. And his house, Bud Morgan's house, got totally wiped out. Fred Hunter had just a little bit of water in his house, because the debris worked the water away from it. We had to come in through after the water went down a little bit. Only way we get here is come down Bowles, then hit Happy Camp, I forget the name of the street down through, and then come back across. In order to get into Plum Creek, we had to doze our way in, because it wiped out so much fence and so much road, and put a lot of rock and everything else in there. We had tractors, I think, down there on the Plum Creek. One family had a cow down there for the milk and had chickens down there. And the cow was inside the barn, and she had to hold her head up above the water. We could hear the daggone roar of the river up here when it was going down the Plum Creek.
You know, let's talk a little bit about food that you ate here. Were there any gardens? Was there any orchard or fruits?
There wasn't too much gardening around here. It was all brought in, as far as I can remember.
Mike?
Well, I remember Martha, the cook, was an incredible cook.
Oh, yeah.
She was incredibly gifted cook, and she made a lot of things out of cream and whole butter and eggs. She just was, the food, like you said, at the bunkhouse was amazing. She put an incredible spread every day for these single guys. Food was good.
Were there any other animals around, like pork or chickens that they raise here in addition to the beef?
Yeah, they had a pig lot just south of Bud's horse barn. There was a pig lot, and then down to Plum Creek, there was a big chicken flock, and Ralph took care of that. And I remember Mr. Phipps liked to go get the eggs from Ralph and bring them up here. Every 10 days or so, he'd go pick up all the eggs. And he had a little barracuda at that time, and he was coming in the front gate. And I remember he walking in the front gate with egg yolk dripping off of him, and he had rolled his car somewhere in the front driveway and spilled all those eggs all over him, and he came walking in the front gate covered in egg yolks, because he had went down to the Plum Creek to gather eggs.
So did any of the three of you get involved with butchering hogs or chickens?
No.
No?
They took the beef to a German, two brothers had a German butcher shop in Littleton, and what beef they butchered here went there. I can't remember the name of the shop, but it's a little processing plant downtown Littleton.
Now, when the cattle, were they completely fed out and ready for market when they left Highlands Ranch, or did they go to another feedlot for finishing?
They used to.
Skeet?
We had one steer we kept in by the dairy where the cows, milk cows were. And fed it there to fatten him up for meat.
Yeah, most of the cattle were, most of the calves were sold as calves in the fall. Skeet would have had some help with gathering and weaning time and that sort of thing, but I know Mr. Phipps there used to be a cattle buyer in the area named of Sparky. He was a very well-known cattle buyer, and he used to get orders for Mr. Phipps's calves, and they would go all over the country to feedlots, backgrounding farms where they graze on crop residue and then go into feedlots, and ranchers would buy his replacement heifers. They went all over the country. He had a remarkable herd of cattle, and Sparky sent them cattle all over. There's a lot of stories about Sparky buying cattle here and sending them different places, and different things.
Yes, Mike?
I remember at weaning when we'd go gather and bring them in and separate them, and the cows would be pushed back to their respective pastures, but the calves would be down here in the lower pens below the barns, and you could hear them for days, bawling, wanting their mamas. So I remember that distinctly for sure.
Well, let's do one more question before we take a break, and that question is going to be, you've mentioned dairy cows several times. Mike, were the dairy cows here for the ranch's use, or did you actually have dairy products that were sold?
They didn't sell milk, no, it was strictly for use on the ranch. At least while I was here, they didn't. And as I recall, we had 8 or 10 Holstein cows, and Herbie, we called him the chore boy. He was about 60 years old. He wasn't a boy. He was a Canadian guy, walked with a kind of a funny rolling walk because he had frostbit all his toes off when he was a young man. And his chore was to milk the cows at like 4 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. And that was what he did, period. The milk cows were his. And I remember he had a heart attack and fell down the steps of the milk barn. And we would meet, like I said earlier, in the bunkhouse in the morning to get our chores assignment. And Herbie was generally there separating the milk when we were there getting our assignments in the morning. Well, he wasn't there one morning, and we were sitting there talking and drinking our coffee, and Bud finally said, Bud Morgan finally said, somebody go check on Herbie. And we went over there, and he's laying at the bottom of the steps, suffered a heart attack. And so we gathered him up and brought him up here, and the ambulance came and hauled him to town, and I got stuck milking the cows for several. I think we all took turns, as I recall, but it was a lot of unhappy cowboys milking cows.
So you were hand milking, there were no milkers?
No machines, no.
Anybody got anything else to add about dairying?
Not about dairying.
Well, let's take a break for about 5-10 minutes, and then get back, and we'll talk about the mansion itself and your interaction with the family, and we'll go from there. Well, we're going to talk about the mansion and the Phipps family now. Basically, Well, let's start with you, Walter. How much were you around the mansion? How much were you up here?
Oh, us boys spent a lot of time up here. We like going up here. Sometimes Mike or my brother would be out mowing, and I'd bring my football, because I played football in junior high and high school. And I'd be out on the lawn playing football if we weren't branding cattle or something. And Denny Reed and we would go down, and sometimes Bud Morgan's grandson and I, we'd go down in the afternoon and bowl down in the bowling alley. We'd roll all the balls down there until we ran out of bowling balls. Then we'd have to go gather the bowling ball. There wasn't a return on bowling balls. We had to go down there and bring them back. We'd spend the afternoon bowling. And we'd come around, we'd nose around the gardens, we'd look around. We were just curious and just looking at everything, you know. And it was amazing to us, everything around here, you know. And Mr. Phipps, he didn't mind. He'd come out and visit with us sometimes and tell us stories and try to stimulate our intellect some, you know. Sometimes we'd be out back here, we'd be talking to Mr. Phipps out in the garage or looking at these cars or something, and sometimes Mike could be washing them or my brother would be washing them or something sometimes, and Mrs. Phipps would stick her head out the breakfast nook window and say, "You boys want some cake and ice cream?" She'd invite us all in for afternoon of cake and ice cream and Coke, and oh God, did we ever eat cake and ice cream. The cook said, "Just bring all we wanted," and kept filling the bowls and go get another cake if we needed to. We just had a big time. We did that 2 or 3 times, I remember. And then we'd visit with the cooks and everything. They'd ask us questions, where we was from, what we did and everything, you know, and ask us about the branding, how the branding was going. And they wanted to know what was going on the ranch, you know, and so we'd tell them. And we had a big time up here. I never was inside the mansion too much, just in the dining room or the library, the breakfast nook, and of course the library was the last time I saw Mr. Phipps. He wanted to send me and Bud Morgan's grandson, and probably Denny too, I don't know, to college. But I took my boss's offer and he sent me to college. But I got a graduation letter from Lawrence Phipps when I graduated, and he told me if I wanted to go to whatever school I wanted and get the education I desired. But I took another man's offer, but he gave me the same deal. But he always encouraged us to get an education, you know. And the last time I saw Lawrence was when I graduated from college in the spring of 1976. I can't remember exactly what month it was, because I actually graduated in March, and then I had to go back and do a term paper, a senior thesis kind of a thing, which I didn't finish in order to graduate. So I think it was about that time that I came back, and because it didn't take me very long to finish the paper, and then I came back either in April or early May and told him that I finally graduated from college. I went to college up at Montana State University, and he wanted me to learn the cattle business, so I got a degree in agricultural business with a minor in animal science, beef cattle. And I came back and told him he passed away in May of '76, around the 17th, I think, or something like that. But when I came down to visit him, I can't remember who was taking care of him, but his wife, and he might have had a nurse with him, but it might have been Bud Morgan's wife too. I know she took care of him some. He was sitting in the library, and I told him I'd like to see him, and I just came from college, and she said, "Well, he's not in very good health, but we'll ask him." And he was very excited that I was here. He wasn't very coherent, but we still had a good visit. He remembered me and could remember quite a few things. But he was sitting in his chair, kind of relaxing, sleeping quite a bit. But when I could get him to wake up, we'd have a good little short visit, and then he'd nod off again. And I'm surprised the nurses let me in, but he was anxious to see me, and I'm glad I got to see him before he passed away. There just a few days before he passed away, but he was a grand old gentleman.
Mike, what features do you remember about the mansion?
Well, it was coal-fired, and in the wintertime, we would go down, the ranch hand, one of the winter jobs was to go down to the Woolhurst siding, take the grain trucks down there, and we would load the grain trucks off of a iron or coal car. Mr. Phipps had a siding down there. He also, as I recall, owned an interest in a coal mine, and that's where the coal came from. And we would load the coal, had a little paddle type elevator that we would push against the bottom of the coal car, and it would dump. And then we would bring the coal up here, and there's a furnace room in the bottom of the adjacent to the garage over here, and we would dump that, we'd empty that car, and sometimes two cars, into that coal room, and the cowboys would take turns manning the coal furnace in the wintertime. You had a week on and a week off, as I remember. And if it got really cold, Mr. Phipps would call you in the middle of the night and say, you know, Mike, it's getting cold up here, and you'd have to get up and go put coal in the stoker to keep the mansion warm. And I would carry oxygen bottles up to Mr. Phipps's mother-in-law. I can't remember her name, but she was an invalid. That was, other than the one time I sat in the kitchen for several hours waiting to talk to Mr. Phipps. I remember that one. That was about the extent of my experience in the mansion.
Skeet, you said you've been in every part of the mansion, including the roof.
Yeah, I've been in every room. They had water leaks somewhere in the house. They wanted to shut off a valve. And we found a bunch of them up in the attic. One we never did find. I've been underneath on the west end of the house 2 or 3 times, crawling on my belly to find the daggone water valve. Had to back out, take a flashlight in there to try to find it. I couldn't find it. They had a map of it where it should have been, and it wasn't there. So that's about all I know. I've been in.
What were you doing on the roof?
See what was wrong with it. Couldn't find anything wrong with it, so I come down and went off.
Mike, you had something to add?
Well, I remember we would, before the spring rains would come, we would go up there and in the attic, and you would walk through the attic and look, and you could see a light coming through the shakes on the roof, and we would have to go up there and repair it. But also while we were up there, the whole attic was just solid full of trunks and artifacts from, I assume, the Phipps family and before, but there was picture albums and trunks full of clothing, and I always wondered what happened to all that stuff, because it was incredible historic value, and it was just full from one end to the other. We would spend hours up there. We were supposed to be fixing the roof, and we were looking at stuff in the attic.
Around the mansion, who did you interact with? Did you interact with the Phipps family a lot? Were there other people that you interacted with? Mike, you want to continue on that?
I lived in a little yellow house, my wife and I, and 2 kids right outside the garage here. And Mrs. Phipps would come down, and she would walk several times a week, just out walking around getting fresh air. And she would stop and talk. And then she painted a mural on the building where the carriages are, which is right adjacent to that little yellow house. And I remember she did that for my children at the time. Mr. Phipps, rarely saw him, driving in and out. Mrs. Phipps I saw periodic, and and the cooks, you would take milk up to them, or eggs, or whatever they needed. If they needed something carried, but beyond that, no.
What about Skeet? What about you? Who did you interact with around the house a lot?
I brought up the milk and the eggs, or she'd cook at the house up here, come down and get milk, bring up maybe some cream, and that kind of stuff. And then once in a while I'd bring something up to them when it was stormy out, so they wouldn't have to. Annie Phipps had a white German Shepherd at the time, and I had the hood up over my hat and the raincoat come up, and I scared her. And I knocked on the door, let her know if somebody was there.
Walter, what about you? You've talked about some of your interaction, particularly around the college thing. Weren't you quite involved with the hunt club too?
I used to help my brother in, on days we weren't branding for one reason or another, or if we got the branding done early, they would have a few days left over. My brother and Bud Morgan would go down and help with the hunts. What my brother would do, he'd either ride his horse or drive some kind of a vehicle up on one side of the ridge, and Bud Morgan and I would go around in the truck on the other side of the ridge, kind of aid them and chase the coyotes down to them a little bit to where they could see a coyote, you know. Mr. Phipps wanted to make sure that they saw a coyote anyway, and then where they were chasing the coyotes. And so we did that 2 or 3 times, and that was after my sister had left, though. My sister and brother-in-law Jim Smith, my sister Sandra Smith, they lived down there at the hunt club for a while. This was like in 1963 and 4, and then they went to Kentucky for a year, and then they came back in late 65 or 66 and stayed there a couple of years. So we'd go down and visit them. We'd go out and play with the dogs and pet the horses. That Mr. Phipps usually kept his hunt horses down there, and these old polo horses and that sort of thing that he would ride. And some of his friends would ride. I guess they kept him down there. And George Beeman's horses and that sort of thing. So we just play around down there with the horses and the dogs, and then I'd go out and help when we were visiting, I'd go out and help my brother-in-law feed them and that sort of thing, the dogs, and that was kind of interesting. But, that's about all I had to do with the hunt club, though.
How many children were around the ranch, Skeet?
Oh, Don Cole had 3. Bill and Della Reed had 1. Mike Lowther used to work here too. They had 1 or 2 kids. And there was another one, Ron Killer had 2 or 3 kids. He used to live in that house there too. That's about the only ones I know.
Mike, and you had a family here.
Had 2 children. Wendy and Dwayne lived in the end apartment, the south side of the bunkhouse. They had 2. At that time, Don's kids were gone. Bud's kids were long gone. So on the ranch proper itself here was just 4 at that time, when I was here.
And what were how did the children receive schooling? Were they involved with the plum school?
Mine were too young,
Yours were too young.
yes, and I don't remember Wendy and Dwayne, if they were about the same age as mine, so there were no school buses came into the yard or anything, no.
Yeah, I was wondering about the, you know, there was two schools on the western border, the Gann or Kelly School and then the Plum School there. I was wondering if there was any traffic between the ranch and those schools.
I think Mary and Morgan drove the school bus.
Yeah, that's true.
They used to park it out here. And the kids went to several different schools around here,
Okay,
so I can remember. Rodney Cole, Brian Cole, trying to think of the girl's name, Debbie Cole. I imagine Don Cole and Akima Cole are both gone by now. Don Cole had a lot of problems with his stomach and stuff. He used to drive a dozer quite a bit one way in fields and stuff like that, and dozing. That's the only thing he can drive is a bulldozer. One time we had it out on the Kiowa Ranch. Those are international tractor. Those are out there. I had to go out and pick it up and bring it back here after he hit a cow head on going out there. Wound him up in the hospital. So I had to go out there and get it and bring it back here. That was an experience. Loading that daggum thing up on the truck and then get back here and unload it, put it in the garage, backed it down the daggum. On this side of they had the trough in there where the cows would eat, where you had to feed them. Had to back that truck, dozer down in there, and then drive a truck in. I had to take, Bud helped me put rocks on that truck when I got back to go down and grind up some hay for the livestock.
Mike, you were mentioning earlier before we got started with the interview that it was, you could really make a lot of money here as a ranch hand.
Not a single person only got $100 a month, 50 a week, 50 every payday.
A married guy got 200. And eggs, milk, insurance. And that led to the cowboy strike too. I don't know if anybody remembers the cowboy strike that we had too. That was pretty interesting. We had gathered cattle for the neighbors down at Ken Carl, and we had understood that their cowboys were making easily twice what we were making at the time. And so we, as a crew, met in the bunkhouse and talked about our wages, that how underpaid we were at the time. And the next morning we told Bud that we wanted to have a meeting with Mr. Phipps because we wanted a raise. He said, well, I'll mention it to him. And he kept putting us off and putting us off. We were asking for audience with him to talk about a raise. And Bud finally came in the bunkhouse one morning and he said, well, he's not going to give you a raise. Well, we said at that time we had decided that we were all going to quit if he wasn't going to give us any more money. And so the next morning Bud said, well, he wants to talk to one of you. And that one was me. He said, Mike, he'll talk to you. And so I came up that night, I had an appointment with Mr. Phipps at 7 o'clock. And I was here at 6:45, and I sat in the kitchen till almost 8:30 waiting for him to talk to me. He was sitting in the dining room reading his paper and eating. I could see him and he could see me, but he wouldn't talk to me until he was done. And then when I did get to talk to him and plead our case, all he did was talk about how terrible the government treated him on the sale of Chatsfield or Plum Creek, and that no, we weren't going to get a raise. That was my interaction with Mr. Phipps in the cowboy strike, they called it.
So you never really quit?
I did after that, yes. Several other guys did too. Yeah, that was when I left.
Do you happen to know if it resulted in the next hirees getting paid more money?
I do not know.
Let's talk a little bit about Lawrence Phipps Jr. Do you remember anything specifically that around his death, Walter? You spoke a little bit about talking to him, probably very close to that time.
Very close to his death, yeah. I didn't go to the funeral or anything. I remember my brother I don't think was working here right at that time. I think he'd left too, but I came up to visit my brother and he said that Mr. Phipps had passed away, and we came down to visit the people at the time, and of course a lot of people were kind of worried. They didn't know what was going to happen to the ranch. They didn't know what Lawrence III was going to do with the ranch. And then later on we found out that they were going to sell it, and some of the fellas lost their jobs and had to go look for other jobs, and were kind of worried, you know. After his death, my brother and I weren't part of it, and probably neither was Mike, but for the people that were still here, it was probably a devastating time, you know. But before then, I would keep in touch with Mr. Phipps. I'd see him at the state fair. I saw him and Lawrence down there at the state fair a few times, and we'd visit, because I was in college at that time, and we would visit about the cattle business and everything, and I used to visit with him quite a bit. If we were up here and I could find him, I'd visit with him. He would visit with you about everything, and mostly he liked to talk about the cattle business, and then the last time I saw him was a little saddening, because he wasn't in really good health, and I had to try to keep getting his attention because he would doze off to talk to him. But when he was awake, we had some good conversation. He remembered quite a bit. And we visited quite a while there. Sometimes I just sit with him and let him doze a minute, and then say something, and he'd wake up again. And his nurse was in the other room, or I don't know whether that was his nurse or Mrs. Morgan, but it was an interesting time. But he always loved to visit and talk and stimulate your intellect, you know. He had been a very astute businessman in his lifetime, you know. Board of directors of many companies, you know, telephone companies, steel companies, that sort of thing, you know.
Mike, any memories about his passing? I didn't hear about it until it was done. He had passed. I didn't know. I didn't had no involvement there.
Did you have got any memories of Marvin Davis?
None.
Anybody else? Any?
I just remember reading about it in the paper. Read about the sale of the ranch. I think Lawrence leased it back for a while, and then tried to run cattle here for a while, but I remember reading about it in the paper, you know, about what was going on. But I didn't come down to visit too much after that. I brought the editor of Western Horseman magazine up here after Mission Viejo bought the ranch, and we gave some of them a little tour and talked to them about the ranch, and I brought Randy Whitty, the editor of Western Horseman magazine, up here one time because I got in the livestock newspaper business, and we did a story on the mansion and the Mission Viejo owned it. Cheryl that worked for Mission Viejo brought us, came down here and met us, and met with some of the other people a time or two, and we gave us some historical information and that sort of thing. And so I've always tried to keep in touch with whoever was around the mansion or anything, you know, best I could.
You know, I read some things that said that the sale to Mission Viejo, the community was somewhat upset, and there were some moves afoot to try to kind of block what was happening. Anybody know anything about it, Mike?
No knowledge. I read about it in the paper, but no, I didn't.
I remember a friend of mine that I grew up with east of Colorado Springs, he worked for Budweiser Company for a while, and I think Philip Morris Tobacco Company or something owned this for a while. Or maybe they were part of Mission Viejo or something, and they used to come up here and have their Christmas parties in the mansion. He used to tell me about coming up here to the mansion having their Christmas parties up here, and he said somebody would just open the door and they'd all come in, and they just didn't party too much, but they just all were amazed at the mansion, all tour, go through the mansion and look at everything. I don't know whether there's any furniture here or not, I don't think much, but they went room to room, giving themselves a tour of the mansion.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the surrounding ranch properties that you may or may not have been involved with. But Mike, you remember anything about the Big Dry Cheese Ranch, the Big Dry Creek Cheese Ranch?
Yes, I do. It was empty when I worked here, but the big two-story house and the outbuildings were all there. I never went in the big house because it was locked up, but the outbuildings, I remember seeing the big cheese forms that were there on the side. Beautiful little spot where the house was, surrounded by big trees, but I just remember riding horses over there to gather cattle and things, but beautiful place.
Skeet, any memories about the cheese ranch?
Oh yeah, I think we had to take coal over there one time for their furnace before he started there. It was, I don't remember when the last time we got a carload of coal in. But it takes, we used two trucks. One for the big house, and this one went around to different other houses. And we had to take some coal, and use some coal down there to heat the water for the dogs, so we could bathe them. Got to take a load of coal down there, if I remember right. That's way before I got married.
Mike?
Well, I remember we had 3 truckloads coming up that hill right off of Santa Fe on county line. At the time, it was a pretty good hill coming up.
Yeah.
And the lead truck was driven by a guy who was only here a short time as a truck driver who can work on the ranch. And he was a heavy-set guy, and I remember him stopping all of a sudden on the hill and jumping out and jerking his pants off. A bee had flown in the window and down and got into the back of his pants and stung him. And I remember him stopping that truck and jumping out and getting his pants off to get the bee out.
Walter, any thoughts about the cheese ranch?
I remember going over there and branding and going over there a time or two with my brother. I remember a family lived there. I don't know whether we ate there during branding there or whether we truck back here to eat. I don't remember eating there, but I remember my brother and I going in and meeting the family and visiting with them one time, doing something there, but we just went over to Brandon, but I think we drove back here to eat. It was a nice big ranch, nice corrals it seemed like and everything, but I don't, anything other than that, I don't remember it too much.
Mike, did you have any interaction with the Flying Bee?
No. It, as I recall, was not part of the ranch. The Flying Bee wasn't.
Was the ranch out there north of Kiowa?
No, that was Quarter Circle Bell.
That was north of Elizabeth.
Yeah, Comanche was Kiowa.
Yeah,
The Circle
Comanche.
B is, or Flying B's right over here by the reservoir, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It wasn't really part of it wasn't
No.
part of Highlands
Yeah, I
Ranch.
remember it being there, but I didn't, it wasn't part of the ranch, no.
Do you remember any memories, Skeet, about the Griggs Ranch?
Built a what?
The Griggs Ranch?
He had three, this ranch here, the Quarter Circle Bell one, and the one north of Elizabeth, and then the one north of Kiowa. I forget the name of that one.
Griggs was a homestead,
It was,
an
yeah.
old 1880s type homestead.
What about any interaction with the Cherokee Ranch? Mike?
Yes. We called that the Douglas pasture that bordered the Cherokee. And that's where the heifers were kept. And I remember we kept the replacement heifers down there, and before the fall got too heavy, we would go gather them and bring them home, trail them all the way home from the Douglas pasture, which is on the west side of Douglas Park. And an early storm came in, and we had to go get them, and it was, when we left here on horseback, it was 15 below zero. We rode across there. I remember being so incredibly cold and uncomfortable. And when we got over there, we built a fire because we were all so miserable. And we gathered them up and trailed them back here. I remember that. And anyway, that bordered the Cherokee Ranch.
Oh yeah, I remember now.
Yeah.
If you take a look at that place, look right straight up the hill from where down in the valley up at the castle. So you can look down at us. You can also look up and see Daniels Park. You can also look down in to the ranch down there.
Mike?
There was an old barn that was on the Douglas pasture that was interesting because it was made by a shipbuilder, and it was all, no metal in it. It was all made of wood, peg, dowels and things like that. Very interesting look inside. I'm sure it's long gone, but it was a beautiful building.
Still there.
Is it?
Still there?
It is still there.
Do you remember the silo?
No.
That's
Octagonal,
amazing.
wood silo, octagonal shape,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
'Cause we
right
had
next,
to
right next to it.
go across, there was a bar on the south, on the west side of Santa Fe, and go across the bridge. I think in between the two bridges was a gate we had to go through and wind up back up through there in order to get there. We had to spray, I think it took a sprayer up there once or twice back up in there to spray the cows.
Yeah, that barn was built to last.
That was part of the
Still
Phipps
there.
Ranch too.
Still there.
And interestingly enough, the silo is built the same way as a ship. It's called a tongue lock silo. In Douglas County, there's only two of them, and one is still there. One is way down in the southern part of the county called the Lorraine Ranch. It's the only two that I know of that are in Douglas County. So, Mike?
Was the one you're talking about south of Castlewood Canyon?
Yes,
I
sir.
remember that one too, yeah. Because I worked on the Prairie Canyon after here too.
Yeah, the Lorraine Ranch is sometimes called the Red Gate Ranch, so yeah, it's down at Lincoln Mountain and down in that area. Well, we've talked a little bit about the ranches. What are your memories of Littleton, operating with Littleton at that time as the town right to the north of you?
Before
Ski?
it started in Littleton, you could, from here toward the hill, where Bud Morgan's house, not Bud, yeah. Bob Schwalfer's house used to sit on the orchard on Broadway. That's where he lived for a while. And from there on, it was all Littleton, that I can remember. From there, from Orchard this way was nothing but the house on the hill on County Line Road.
Mike, you
That
know,
was Dry Creek, not Orchard.
Dry Creek, yeah. Dry Creek? Yeah.
Dry Creek and Broadway is where Swafford's
Yeah.
house was. And then between here and there was nothing.
Was nothing. Now, it's all shopping center and whatnot. Doctor's office, hospital, you name it.
well, which one are you, Walter? Can you tell us about Blakeland?
The ranch,
No, the community?
Lakeland, no, I don't
Blakeland?
know anything about it.
Mike?
Yeah, there was a little cafe there owned by Roy,
Nelson,
pardon?
Ray Nelson.
Yes, Roy Nelson, his wife was the cook, and he just kind of held court there. He didn't do a lot of work, and his son-in-law changed tires and filled gas. And his daughter, their daughter, Bonnie Nelson, a country singer. But yeah, we would stop in there. Bud liked to stop there at Bud Morgan and have coffee. And then you could take that road on into, called Riverside, I think was the name of it.
Riverside Acres.
Riverside, little town, which is in the bottom of Chatfield now. And they had a little convenience store down the bottom of that town too, but that was just west of Lakeland.
Blakeland's got an interesting history. It was founded by a lady named Ethel Blake, who, it was 4 miles south of Littleton property, or Littleton proper. And around 1929, she ran into financial difficulty and she sold it to Frank Kistler, who made it part of the Diamond K, which ultimately became this ranch. Her sister took it over and built a restaurant there, and they called it the Coffee Cup Restaurant. And they had a big thing of a coffee cup up on top of the restaurant. Well, at one point in the early 30s, they had a fire. And most of it burned down. A few days later, the thing on the roof came crashing down as well. Well, they rebuilt and it became other things, and had been there for quite a while. When I did an interview with Marvin Beeman, he talked about how he had to get somebody to drive him over to the top of Blakeland Hill because that's where the school bus would pick them up and take them to the Plum Creek School. And they called it, as you talk, a pretty good hill. They talked about it being the Blakeland Hill. And Kistler bought that, and he also bought Woolhurst Stock Farms, just to the north of there, on the other side of the county line as well.
Did he build Woolhurst Country Club?
I don't think he did, but it has its own history too. Do you have any memories of that?
Yeah, I parked cars there in high school
Mm-hmm.
when the elite would come and party. And we
That
would-
was known as a party place.
was, and we would, you made real good money parking cars. So they would come in, you'd give them a ticket and we'd line their cars up by make, like GMC's here, Ford's here, other,
Chrysler or whatever.
well, or Jaguars, or
Yeah.
Rolls Royces, there was anything and everything you ever saw there. Tip made good money for the mid-60s.
And my understanding that it burned down.
Yeah, it did. Beautiful place. It looked a lot like this architect here.
Well, I've got a couple more questions, and then we'll do a kind of a final roundup with you all, but I've got some personal questions. And Skeet, I understand that you were called the big guy on the ranch.
I don't know whether that's called a big guy or not.
Well, can you tell me how you got that nickname anyway?
I used to pick up a section tie, pick it up and walk off with it and set it in the hole after digging it.
Mike?
I saw Skeeter move a 60-ton coal car with a pry bar once. We'd put our hopper elevator and wasn't quite positioned easily, and he said, well, I'll take care of that. And he took a pry bar and went to the end of the car and put it under the wheel and moved the car just far enough for us.
And to walk it.
Yeah. Very strong individual, very, very strong.
Because there's time when you couldn't move the car. You had to use a truck and a rope to pull it in order to get it past to where we could clean up between the tracks. And sometimes you couldn't move it. You had to use some of that on the wheel to stop it and all that.
Well, Mike, my last question is for you, and I understand for somebody wanting to become a cowboy, you were sort of ill-equipped with winter clothes when you came here.
Oh, gosh. Yes, we were. You know, and cowboys have an ego, and cowboy boots and cowboy hat are obviously the wear, but they're not worth a darn in the wintertime.
And you survived?
We did. We did.
Well, I would like to ask each of you, we'll start with you, Walter, and just go through, there's probably a number of questions I haven't asked that you wanted to touch. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I didn't have to work as hard as these guys did on the ranch here, but it was kind of like I said, it was kind of like a boot camp for me. I learned how to work hard here, work all day long. and I did later at home too, but that was later on. But for a kid my age to do that, it was pretty exhausting sometimes, but it was fun though. But I remember, I didn't mention his name, but we used to have a great time branding over there on the Quarter Circle Bell Ranch north of Elizabeth, and there was a fellow over there named Brent, what was his name? Skeet?
Brent Levitt.
Brent Levitt. He was a very nice guy. He reminds me of the guy in Tom Ryan's painting Sharing an Apple with his horse, if you ever seen that. And he was a big old blonde-headed guy, and he was a very, very good man to visit with and work with. And we had, when we branded over there, we had dinner over there. And so we all went down into the downstairs of their house to have dinner, and they had several tables set up, and the cooks from here went over, and some of the other wives came over from the Comanche Ranch and some of the Cheese Ranch. I think all the wives got together, and plus the cooks here, and cooked a huge meal for everybody to eat over there. And we were sitting at the dining room table one time, just to let you know how strong Skeet was. We were all sitting at this big table and eating, and he was trying to get some ketchup out of a bottle, so he hits it once and nothing came out. He hit it again and nothing came out. He hit it again and just sprayed glass, ketchup, and everything all over the table. We all had to change our dinner. That was quite a time. He just shattered the bottle everywhere. That was a beautiful ranch over there. The Cherokee Ranch, I mean, the Comanche Ranch was a little smaller, just kind of like a family house and barn and stuff, but the Quarter Circle Bell had 2 or 3 houses and some barn and a lot of really nice corrals. It was a beautiful ranch, very well kept place over there. And Brent did most of the work over there, but it was god awful beautiful place. Had creeks and ponds. And I remember he went out and got a frog one time and showed it to Bud Morgan. And he said, "You ever seen you got any frogs this size over at your place?" And it was a huge thing. I mean, it must have stretched out, 8 inches or so. And I guess he ate them, ate the frog legs or something. But he invited Bud Morgan over for frog legs sometime. He said, you ever seen frogs like this before? I'd never seen frogs like that before. It was a pretty interesting ranch though.
Skeet, what about you? What have we covered that you wanted to talk about?
Well, when the first time we branded over there to North Elizabeth, didn't have no chutes to brand. It's all roped and drugged to us. I was a header, Don Cole was the healer. One time a goddamn calf kicked loose from the healer, almost wiped my glasses off. But I happened to block it and pull this, usually the header pull the back leg, the top leg to the healer so they could brand and vaccinate. And that was kind of easy. Some of the calves were light, some of them were a little bit heavier than others. But you had to have a glove on one hand. So you go down the rope, when you stop at the end of the rope, you automatically come up and come down. And the roper loosened up when you got him on the ground. You take the undo off and he'd gather up and go get another one. They had two hitters and 2 healers. We took turns individual. Mostly I was the header, Don Cole was the healer. You had to have the power and the speed to do it with some of those calves. Sometimes it seemed like it spun twice in here. Then we had to go help some of the other ranchers that helped us. They had no chutes. They roped and drug. I can remember one time one of them was almost chest high to me. And I picked that daggum thing up and put it on the ground. And I had to have the power and the speed to do it. At that time I was a whole lot stouter than I am now.
But here on the Highlands Ranch, you did have branding chutes.
Yeah. And down here, we had what you call a table chute to brand. You had to have pull the thing, step on it, and pull back at the same time, and unloosen 2 bars so they could brand on the hip and do whatever else they wanted to do to them. Then that's about the only thing I can remember.
Mike, what have we talked about you want to talk about?
It was just, for me, it was an incredible learning experience. One of the best times of my life. Mr. Bud Morgan was just an incredible man. Fair, passionate, patient, great man. Thought the world of him. Just, he was a good boss, very good boss. Great time.
Did you see that they're building a memorial garden for Marion just over here now?
Oh, they are.
Yeah, they just started it this fall, or
That's
this summer,
good.
and
That's
it'll
neat.
be completed next spring. There's a sign just over here on this side of the property saying Marion's Garden coming soon.
She was a gentle lady. Gentle lady.
She was a great woman, this one.
I used to call her quite a bit when I'd come up visit my brother. I'd say, well, give Marion a call. I'd like to talk to her, and he'd call her, and I'd visit with her. Or sometimes I'd call her from home, visit with her, ask her how she was doing. And I could call her anytime she'd visit. She loved to visit. You know, or sometimes we'd come by and I'd stop to visit her, but she was never home. She was always off playing cards or in her civic affairs somewhere. You know, I could call her anytime, visit with her all throughout her life. You know, even after Bud passed away.
Well, I see Nancy sitting over there, and that reminds me of one question that is really off the wall for you. Anybody can answer that. And that is, what did they do with the coyotes after the hunt?
I don't remember what they did with them.
I don't
I think they
remember.
just chased them
Yeah.
with the hounds.
Okay.
I remember one time, a lake down here on the other side of the corral, where the dairy cows used to be, hold overnight, was out there on the ice, and the ice had bubbles in it. I took a pitchfork and broke the ice out so I could get to him. And then I brought him up and put him in the horse barn. Then I called down to South Ranch, told him we had his dog. Why don't you just turn him loose? He'll come home. I didn't do that.
We asked Marvin Beeman that question about.
Did you?
And his answer was, he said, we chase them, but we don't catch them very often.
Yeah.
Only if they're sick or very old or informed or crippled or whatever would be the only time they would actually catch them.
I don't ever remember catching one.
He said, but we chase them a lot. The Arapahoe Hunt Club,
They're just south of me now.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Arapahoe Hunt Club has a history that they're proud of, that they've said that, and they hunt 8 months a year, twice, 3 times a week. They said that since 1972, they have always spotted a quarry, prey. So they've always chased something in
Summertime
every
and winter.
hunt
Sometime in the summertime
since
and winter,
1972.
we'd hear bugle and see them riding out across. We had to have fences where they could jump the horses.
You know, what you mentioned was the people driving them other places. Well, they had a group of associates, typically the wives, who were called the Hilltoppers, who followed the groups around in these big cars or wagons or whatever it would be. And in many cases, they knew where to go because they knew the patterns of the hunts of where the coyotes would be likely to go, being chased by the pack and led by the management group, you know, the huntsmen and the whipper-ins and all those people. But the Hilltoppers were just as much as part of that whole hunt experience, which typically could go on for 18 miles and be 6 hours,
Yeah,
depending upon what they found and where it took them.
yeah, yeah.
I sell them horse feed now.
What's that?
I sell them horse feed now. Rappahannock.
Yeah, because they're out at the old Lowry bombing range now.
It's just south of Watkins, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly would like to thank you, gentlemen, for both your time and all of your interesting information. And that will, it will ultimately wind up in the Douglas County Libraries. You'll probably be able to go see yourself at some point.
It will also be on the Highlands Ranch Historical Society's website as well.
Good, yeah.
So thank you.